Good evening and welcome to the program. This is the Limelight. My name is Prince Apollo. This evening, we focus on the global threat associated with climate change, and specifically we'll be looking at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change, which is happening in Baku, Azerbaijan. This conference will be going on for at least a week or so as countries from all over the world look at the ways on how they can mitigate the effects of climate change and to understand the aspects behind this conference. I'll be joined by Mr. Nwahereza Nelson Nkwene. And Nwahereza Nelson is a forestry governance and carbon market expert. He is in Nigeria, specifically Enugu State. Let's connect with Nelson. Nelson, you are live on Sol TV. You have been following this conference. You are very enthusiastic about issues of climate change. Let's understand what significance does this meeting in Baku, Azerbaijan hold at this point in time?
Thank you very much, my brother Apollo, for hosting me, and thank you, Salt Media, for hosting me. To begin with, before I talk about what this conference is about, as you put it, this is about combating climate change. I would like to use this chance to inform or remind our viewers that climate change is real and it is happening, and if nothing is done about it, the effects are likely to be far more reaching than they are now. Back to your point of the significance of the COP that is happening in Baku, Azerbaijan, this conference of parties that serves as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. This is an agreement that about 198 countries are party to, where they agree that they will collectively contribute towards combating climate change. So this meeting, countries meet to reassess themselves and to recommit and plan for how they can collectively combat climate change that is a threat to everyone, not even only the poor, but even the rich, and you and I.
Tell us, Nelson, what are these effects for a lay person to understand the magnitude of the threat or the risk?
Climate change, in simple terms, can be understood as the changes in frequency and intensity of, let's use rainfall. If, let's say, in the past, rain used to come around March to April, and around May up to July used to be a dry season, but now rain is no longer come during the times they used to come. That is not normal, and when they come with a lots of frequency. So that is a simple example of how I can illustrate climate change, and also increased droughts. We have seen increased floodings. We have seen people running out of food, the famines, because of the droughts. Those are all manifestations of climate change.
Well, Nelson, tell us now what our delegates who are attending that conference are proposing as measures to mitigate the effects of climate change.
I think I missed your question. Yes. You may need to repeat for me.
Yes, I was asking, what are those proposals that are laid out at the conference or anywhere else by those delegates from member countries, what are they proposing? What should be done to mitigate the effects of climate change?
To begin with, there is this key component of climate financing. I would speak from the perspective of developing countries like Uganda, where we are very vulnerable to climate change and we have limited capacities in terms of resources to combat or support our communities to recover. One of the key areas that are being discussed at the COP29 is the financing of climate change, or climate, which you may call climate financing. As you may be aware, developed countries in COP 2026 that happened in 2015, developed countries committed to mobilize about 100 billion annually to support developing countries to mitigate their climate effects. One may wonder why developed countries committed to contribute this, because historically they are responsible for the greater part of the emissions. And in the Paris Agreement, there is what we call common responsibility, but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, where if you emitted more, like developed countries, you have a higher obligation to contribute towards mitigating. And so these developed countries committed to contribute or mobilize about 100 billion per annum, but they have not been able to meet this obligation. And one of the biggest items on the agenda is to push to make sure that these developed countries commit to this target that they set. Another important issue is loss and damage of the climate change. This is a situation where even when mitigation and adaptation efforts have been undertaken, countries will continue to face those that cannot be combated. These could be social, they could be cultural impacts. And so this conference, one of the objectives or one of the goals is to materialize or operationalize this loss and damage. And one key important item that is on the front line is the respect of the indigenous people in all this climate change mitigation. Indigenous people, they play key roles in, one, conserving the environment; two, they forego livelihoods to make sure that nature is conserved. So in this regard, their efforts should be respected, and their interests also take the front line in as far as climate change mitigation is concerned. This is one of the matters that is going to be discussed at the COP29 that is ongoing. One unfolding interesting story that has so far happened is where a representative of the United States encouraged that there is a need for broader or broadening of the donor base, given that the recent elections and the history of the incoming administration has shown that they have shown less interest in financing climate. So by this, the United States is asking developing countries to start contributing or to start putting in resources, which I find quite ridiculous. You can't be the biggest emitter, and these countries, they have done less of emitting, and they are foregoing part of their livelihoods to make sure that the climate change is mitigated. But you are saying, look, on top of that, you put some finances. So I guess, and I pray that our representatives, in particular from Uganda, discuss that and reach to a logical conclusion to support our communities that are so vulnerable to climate change.
Nelson, please, I didn't hear you talk about the move to promote green energy in order to reduce carbon emissions. I can see, for instance, switching to electric vehicles and other things. Can you briefly tell us about those measures that are expected from these developing countries in line with the efforts to mitigate climate change effects?
Thank you, Mr. Aparo, for that reminder. I should have talked about it under climate financing. True, one of the measures or one of the strategies to mitigate or to reduce on the carbon emissions is to shift from having economies that depend on petroleum or fuel or non-renewable energies to infrastructure or economies that depend on renewable energy, or what I may call, in simple terms, clean energy transition. This means that we'll need to move away from, let's say, cars that use petrol and diesel, and then we go to cars that use electricity that are chargeable. But you see, all this comes at a cost. One, if I may give an example, you need to have, let's say, recharging points. And as I said, in developing countries, we have limited resources. So financing clean energy transition is one aspect that also is being discussed under the COP29. The point is all about financing. Uganda already has clean energy transition strategy plan, but the question is how can it be facilitated, how can it be funded? Among other issues that are being discussed is how to attract private investors to come on board. Well, from the developing country perspective, we have organized the environment that is favorable for all these investments to investors and the countries work here. But what is lacking is just a few baselines, a few funding here and there to make sure that developing countries can also greatly contribute towards climate change mitigation.
Well, Nelson, you are in Nigeria, one of the leading producers of oil in Africa. Using the case of Nigeria, what do you see on the ground in as how the country's policy, the policy in Nigeria, changing towards towards clean energy, because most of the countries, like the one you live in today, depend on oil, which is actually a target in this campaign to shift from fossil oil use to clean energy.
Thank you. I want to say that in Nigeria, one, they are facing, can I say, power or energy crisis. In the bigger part of the day, you find that we have no electricity, and people are struggling actually to cook. Putting that aside, Nigeria, the country, also has a clean energy transition plan that is basically on paper, but it has not been implemented on ground. You may why Nigeria, the biggest economy, has not implemented its clean energy transition action plan. It is the failure is attributed, one, to corruption, two, in short, I'm saying the money that would be used to facilitate, let's say, solar energy or distribution of, can say, biomass and supporting, let's say, women enterprise to adopt bioenergy, so forth strategies. This money is not properly used, it is used by a few politicians for their benefit. And whereas Nigeria, as you put it, is one of the biggest economies, they are also waiting for developed countries actually to contribute towards their implementation of the clean energy transition. So it is some sort of an irony that needs to be addressed, and Africa as the continent needs to sit down and get back on the table and check what is not right. Is it a question of lack of resources, or it is a question of poor planning?
So in short, Nelson, you're saying the issue of financing should be prioritized if anything is to happen in developing countries. The issue of financing must be taken serious.
True, the issue of financing needs to be taken serious, and equally, the appropriation of these finances that come in the country. If, let's say, you have earned finances from reducing deforestation and the money has a country, where should you allocate this money? Should you put it into subsidizing electricity so that our local poor people can cook? Or instead you are going to shift it and put it on the budget of security? Or you are going to shift it and put it on a budget that really does not directly contribute to mitigating climate change? So, well, as we are saying, developed countries should release the funds. As developing countries, we also need to learn to prioritize and invest money in right or priority areas where the results will be felt in line of climate change mitigation.
As an expert, Nelson, in this area of governance and carbon, what is it called? Carbon expert, something like that.
Carbon market.
Carbon market expert. What could be your recommendations, especially to developing countries like the one actually you come from, Uganda and others? What could be the recommendation to the leaders and the peoples living in developing countries in embracing or in actually being part and participating in this global effort to mitigate effects of climate change?
I would begin with that our governments need to prioritize climate change mitigation to build the resilience of our people. Apollo, I don't know whether time allows, but I would want to give you a small example. If you look at the village where you come from, may I come from Mitoma district, in particular in the north. If you look in your village, there is that old woman who has a house. You imagine it rained heavily and that house is destroyed. What is her capacity to rebuild that house? And how much time would it take for her to rebuild her house? And you, as Apple, as an elite, if you were asked to contribute to that woman, how many vulnerable people would you contribute to? So this is how impactful climate change can be. So there is a need for deliberate effort by our respective governments to prioritize investing in building people's resilience to climate change. And I want to remind also our viewers and fellow Ugandans that none of us is safe from effects of climate change. So it is a collective effort. It should be a deliberate effort to undertake actions that reduce on fastening the climate change. The efforts are ongoing, but if nothing is done, even on the grassroots, climate change is here and it is real, and each one of us is a candidate to the impact of climate change.
Wow, I didn't hear you speak about sensitization of the masses, and actually others are proposing that climate change issues should be actually taken to classrooms to have students understand the impact and consequences of not minding these effects of climate change. I don't know if that's an issue because we only have 2 minutes to wind up this show.
To me, I don't think that it is necessary to take into classroom to teach kids or lower schools on what climate change is, because this is something that is evident. What we need more is building our community's resilience, the ability to recover and the ability to respond to impacts of climate change.
Wow. Nelson, can you make your final comments in just 1 or 1.5 minutes?
To conclude, I want to thank you, Aparo, and your team for allowing me a platform to speak to fellow Ugandans. And lastly, I would like to let fellow Ugandans know that climate change is real and it should be a duty of each one of us to contribute towards mitigating climate change. It is not a duty of Nelson Mukwege, it is not a duty only of Apollo, it is not a duty only of Pastor Bujingo, it is not only a duty of Mr. Museveni, it is a duty of each one of us. If nothing is done, then we shall all perish.
It's a duty for us all, but finally from me, do you think these efforts will yield some positive results in the near or distant future?
It is a process, and the process is ongoing. And these COPs, they meet basically to assess how we are progressing. At times, we don't meet the targets, but we are on the right track.
Thank you so much, Nelson, and of course, for your time and these insightful deliberations we've had. Nuwahereza Nelson Mukwege is a forestry governance and carbon market expert. He is, of course, a PhD candidate at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, our viewers. We've heard from the experts, the expert anyway. What we need to do is to have a concerted effort and also for governments to build that resilience in communities to respond to the effects of climate change. My name is Prince Apollo. Let's take it serious. Let it be intentional. The effects of climate change are real. Let's catch up again next Friday in another edition of The Limelight. I can say good evening, God bless you, and God bless Uganda.